Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Through the Fire. I am your host, Ryan Wickline, and today we are joined by a very special guest. He is a speaker, author, and songwriter, Mr. Weston Brandon. How you doing today, Weston?
Good. Thanks for having me, man.
Hey, it is my pleasure. Like I was talking to you about in the pre-interview, you've been through the fire and you've been refined, and I think you have a pretty amazing story and a testimony to share with everybody.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's turning it into something worth sharing is the hard part. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People don't like to listen to people who are speaking from open wounds. They like to hear from people with scars, and turning it into scars instead of wounds is that's the goal, right?
Yep. So the number one question the audience is probably wondering, who is Weston Brandon?
So I'll give you a quick quick rundown of kind of how I came up and what I do now. So I live in Utah. I was born and raised in Utah. Um, I grew up on a cattle ranch, but not like some big Yellowstone cattle ranch kind of thing. It's more like a family cattle business, maybe had 100 head at the most. I grew up moving a lot of sprinkler pipe and alfalfa fields, and that was my life. And did show steers, and then I graduated high school and I left and I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for 2 years, and I actually served in Florida. And after that, came home, and then it's like, all right, what do I do with my life? You know what I mean? Like, what's the career choice and those types of things? And I jumped into sales, and that took me to Texas, and I guess for all intents and purposes, I was killing it. And I'd gotten married, had a house, had knew where everything was going. And at 23, I was making good money. Like, I checked all the boxes of kind of what I was taught in school meant what success was, you know what I mean? And then if anybody listens to any podcast that I'm on, then they're probably going to hear the signature story of while I was there in Texas. My wife passed away 2 weeks after she gave birth to my son at 26 weeks. So I went from married, and I had been married for about 2 years when this happened, but having kind of everything going for me, I guess you could say, and had built myself into a really good position, to suddenly having the rug pulled out from under me and adding um, single dad and widower to my list of titles, I guess. Things that I didn't expect to have that happen. So after that, I obviously, the now what question was the big one. And when my son was finally discharged from the NICU, and he was fine, he didn't have any other complications, luckily. So there were some miracles there. But when I brought him home to my house in Texas, I was like, I don't, none of my family's here. They're all back in Utah, and my wife's family's mostly in Utah as well. So I decided to pick up and move back to Utah. And I moved right back into the basement bedroom that I was in when I graduated high school. Like, start, hit the reset button. But now I have this little infant to take care of. And I had to change careers because handling sales quota stress was damn near impossible at that point. Just picking up the phone I couldn't do it. Something was busted in my head and I couldn't bring myself to do it anymore. So I quit that and I went to trade school, got into HVAC refrigeration, and now as a day job, that's what I do. I actually fix commercial kitchen equipment. And now more recently, I felt a really strong calling to help teach specifically young adults and young adult men, hopefully, is like who I really want to get in front of the most, of how to overhaul your life, either just starting or if the rug's pulled out from under you. Because I've also remarried and had a couple more kids now. In fact, if you look behind me, there's oh, it's not there anymore. My wife moved all these Halloween decorations. There's normally pictures of us right there, but this is usually where we have pictures of me and my first wife and Vance when he was little, and then me and my family now. It's usually kind of our whole family story sitting right there behind me. But somebody decided to shake things up for the holiday. But I guess in a nutshell, that's the Cliff Notes version of kind of who I am. And now I go around speaking. I was just in Tennessee at Lincoln Memorial University about a month ago, speaking to some students. So what I that's what I like doing, what I'm trying to do more of.
Awesome. How did your faith help you bring you out the other side? Because that can be something really, really difficult. I mean, you lost your spouse, got an infant that you, as you're broken already, and you got to pick up
Mhm.
and move. How did your faith help bring you out the other side of that?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked about faith because that's the piece that I'm most passionate about. If I can bring in the faith when I speak, I absolutely love to. So thank you for asking me that. Um, I mentioned before that I had served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for 2 years previous to getting married or anything like that, right? Like right out of high school. That 2 years became a well, I should say the experiences that I had during those 2 years became a very important anchor for me during the time that I went through that fire because the experiences that I had with God during that time and improving my relationship with Jesus Christ and just learning more about him and how much scripture study that I did in the Bible and in the Book of Mormon and all these other places, how much I learned about him and what I meant to him, I had to fall back on that because going through this losing my wife, I'm kind of looking at God being like, dude, what the hell? Like,
Yeah.
what did I do to deserve that? And what did she do to deserve that? And just all these, very, very angry, accusatory kind of thoughts are going on in my head directed towards God. So I had to fall back on very rough experiences I had previously in life that he had helped kind of drag me out of to know that, well, I know he can and I know he will. I just have to figure out how to put myself in the position that he can do that, you know. And I think that's the key. When I was in the ICU, because my wife passed away from a pulmonary embolism 2 weeks after she had an emergency C-section, which for anybody that listening to this for the first time or doesn't know what that is, it's a blood clot that gets stuck in your lungs. It's usually pregnancy is a risk factor for blood clots. Surgery, so C-section is risk. Bed rest, which she was on for a week before that, is a risk. So she had all these, kind of things all just piled on top of each other that made her a little bit higher risk. And she got a blood clot. So that happened at home. Luckily, I was there and I did CPR on her for a while to no avail, of course. Ambulance showed up, took her to the hospital. And while I was in the waiting room of the ICU, I was by myself for a minute. And I had that was basically the only quiet time I'd had so far that morning to kind of talk to God for a minute. And of course I'm panicking, I'm freaking out, that I'm losing my wife and it doesn't look good because I did CPR on her for a while and they were still doing CPR when they got to the ER. So I'm thinking she's probably not going to make it. And now I'm not only am I worried and hoping that a miracle happens, but now all of those things that Christians learn in church growing up about Jesus Christ being resurrected and heaven and all the afterlife stuff, that kind of starts whirling through my head like, okay, I spent 2 years teaching about this and I was very passionate about it and I believe it wholeheartedly, but now all of a sudden it's coming into question. Now it before it, not that it was removed, but I guess it kind of was like a, slightly removed from me. Like it's not something I have to really worry about right now because
Yeah.
everything I care about is right here, so I don't have to worry about the stuff after. But now that I'm looking like I'm going to be losing my wife, all of a sudden what comes after is extremely important and I need a reminder. So I remember I knelt down on just this couch that was there and they didn't have a Bible. Well, if they did, I didn't see it. They didn't have anything laying around. I just had an app on my phone with scriptures on it and it had the King James version of the Bible. It had the Book of Mormon. It had a bunch of different religious magazines, like all these different things on there. And I didn't care what it opened up to. I just needed something to say something somewhere. And so I knelt down and I prayed and I basically said, if there's if there is any other time in my life that I have ever needed you to talk to me, like this is the big one. This is it. And don't leave me hanging, please. I need you to I don't even know what I need, but I need you to say something. And so I just closed my eyes and started kind of tapping on my phone and to see, whatever random would pop up. And I opened up to a scripture and the verse reads, and I might get this slightly wrong. I might have to paraphrase it, but said, "My son, I have somewhat more to say unto thee, for I perceive that thy mind is worried concerning the resurrection of the dead." And that was verse 1 when I opened it up. So that hit me like a ton of bricks, and that was in Alma chapter 40 in the Book of Mormon, if everybody cares to look that up. But that experience and how powerfully I felt, I guess, God in the room there with me when I read that, I was like, I didn't even realize that I was really worried about that at the moment, but I was. And then I keep reading, and it's just teaching me all the things that I was already taught, just reminding me of what I already knew. Basically saying you're gonna have to lean on this. Now, fast forward a couple of months, and life isn't really any better. And my son's now home, and I've moved back to Utah with my family, and I'm still super, super angry, super unhappy. Um, but somebody told me somewhere that even if you're mad at God, at least tell him. And if that's all you can say to him, just don't stop talking to him. So I had a lot of prayers that were very angry, and I yelled at him a lot. You know what I mean? And I don't know what your follow up questions that are. I could keep going through the whole rest of the story. You know what I mean? But that experience there in the ICU and some of the ones I had previously in life were what I had to lean on to make the big decisions that I had coming up.
Yeah, you touched on it a little bit right there about being angry with God. I mean, I don't think some people understand. It's okay. He can handle you being upset and angry a little bit. At
Mhm.
least you're talking to him. He can use that pain to help you.
Oh yeah, and he did too, because I get a lot of answers when I open up the Word somewhere. I open up the Scriptures, but then I also get a lot of him talking to me through music sometimes. You know, and I remember one particular time I was trying to get back into working my sales list and following up with some leads from my other job. And I had set up a computer in the basement of my parents' house in a different room, and I was trying to go through it, and I was just hitting a brick wall, and I could not. There was something going on in my head that I couldn't figure out, why I couldn't think straight about my job like I used to, and why it was so hard for me to actually hit the call button to call somebody, why it freaked me out so bad to make a phone call all of a sudden that it never did before. And I remember getting frustrated and angry and kind of yelling at him again, and just had this feeling. I was like, you should just go pull up some music or something. And I can't remember if I flipped my phone open or if I pulled up YouTube and was like searching some type of spiritual music, whatever. But I have no idea how I got to this. But in any rate, I heard this song. It's a cover of a Hunter Hayes song, but it was sung by Chad Graham, who's part of a gospel a cappella group called Anthem Lights, I think. And I didn't really know him a whole lot then, but that's how I found him. This guy, Chad Graham, did a cover of the song Dear God by Hunter Hayes. And the key phrase in that song is, Dear God, just remind me that you don't mess up. And I remember listening to that, and he's talking about how much, the lyrics in the song are talking about how much pain they're feeling and this kind of thing. And it's like, remind me you don't mess up, and that this is, what's going on and I don't, kind of a thing. And that was another big, like, that song then became kind of an anthem for me for a little bit, alongside some other songs that were more like venting my anger. But
Yeah.
I kind of had both. I had some Five Finger Death Punch in there, just like just getting mad, and it was kind of cathartic. But yeah, that was a big piece too.
When you first heard that song, were you like, oh, I know, but still mad a little bit? Like, I know you're trying to tell me something, but why? Like
Yeah, it was.
that little anger part, I've been there before.
Yeah, I mean, in that moment, in the moment of listening to it, the anger, it disappeared for a moment, but then it comes back.
Yeah.
But for that moment when I was listening to it, just kind of felt the love again, and was like, crying. I had tears coming down and wondering what the hell's wrong with me. And it just getting touches like that. It wasn't this always constant. I always feel like God's hugging me, but I would have, these moments that I kind of refill a little bit, just enough to get me to keep going and keep going until, I got to a point where I'd done enough that I wasn't angry with them anymore, and some things had turned out better.
Yeah. What would you say is probably the number one key in moving forward after the loss of a loved one?
Ooh, my gosh, there's some big ones. One of the, I guess one of the perspectives that you have to have is to understand that no matter what you do, people that you care about are going to think you should do it different. whatever that looks like. If you lose a spouse, or you lose a sibling, or you lose a child, or whatever, how you decide to pick up and move forward. Because I don't like the term moving on, because I don't believe that's a thing. Because I don't love my first wife, Lauren, any less than I love the woman I'm married to now. Her name's Kearsley. And how much I loved Lauren before is no smaller than it was the day that she died. In fact, it might even be bigger now. But comparatively, I guess if you think of a ratio as to her portion of my heart, is no longer that as big of a portion of my heart as it used to be, because now I've added a couple more kids in there. I've gotten remarried. I've added more people in there that I love that much, so that while I still love her the same, it's a smaller portion of the whole. So because I shove more love in there, it's not as excruciating anymore. I can talk about her. I can look at pictures of her. I can do all these things without feeling like it's gonna kill me. And so that perspective of understand, like, how whatever you do to move forward with that, there's going to be people that disagree with how you do that, or how fast you do that, or why you do that, or whatever, because other people also care about whoever you lost. Now, if it's your spouse, you could easily, and I think justifiably, make the argument that you are the closest one to them, and everybody else is at least one step removed. But they still lost someone that they greatly care about. And because you're so close to them, I found that people kind of attach their own grief to whoever's closest to the one that they lost, which ends up, in my case, being me, for those that lost Lauren as well. So if I start moving forward and making some progress in whatever way you want to say you're making progress, if you do that faster than these other people decide that they want to do it, well, now your progress makes them extremely uncomfortable, because the example that you're setting to them is something that they don't want to do themselves. And because they don't want to do it, they don't think you should be doing it either. They want everybody to stay kind of where they're at. And this just happens amongst everybody that's involved. So it's possible, and it's a risk that luckily didn't happen a lot with my experience. It happened a little bit at the beginning, but amends were made and discussions were had, and most everybody's pretty good now. But being active in especially widows and widowers circles now, I see that often isn't the case. And that when someone decides to start dating again, or somebody loses a child and they decide that they want to move, or whatever they decide to do with their life, other people that are close to them don't like it, and oftentimes rifts happen, and they don't ever come back, because those people aren't willing to do that, and feelings get hurt and all these kinds of things. So that's a really long answer to basically say, do whatever you need to do, understanding that people are going to say things to you that are probably going to hurt, and it's actually more of a reflection of where they're at emotionally and mentally and spiritually than where you're at, and to take it with a grain of salt.
Man, that's some great insight on that, because everybody heals in different ways. Like,
Mhm.
God heals people, everybody, in different ways. So the way He'd heal me would be different than the way He healed you, and everybody's got to go through their
Yep.
own journey. So somebody's always going to judge you on what you do. So that's some great insight in on that.
Yeah, it's a I've shared my story. I've made posts in groups, and I recently went on another podcast called "We're All Insane." A girl in Maryland runs that, and there's like I think she has 700,000 or 800,000 subscribers on YouTube, so it's a pretty good audience, but it's a lot of young women my age and younger that are a big part of her audience. And I went on and shared my story, and the fact that I met second wife, or in the widow were circles, we call it your chapter 2, because I met her just a few months after my first wife passed away. Holy cow, the hate that I got in that comment section was insane. Like, it even surprised me. And I've known that, as you as you go do this, you're gonna get some haters and people that
Yeah.
disagree with you. But That was something. So I'm kind of having to like listen to myself talking like, remember, you know this already, you know?
Well, at least you know it. So when it
Yeah.
does present itself, you know.
I can talk myself out of it after a minute.
What led you to become an author?
Okay. Well, since we're already talking spiritual stuff, it's kind of along those lines. Um, so I'm gonna have to go back to the career that I jumped into after all that happened. I moved sales and I went to, I guess, a more of a blue collar job fixing stuff. Applied the same level of tenacity that I had at the sales and worked my butt off with this blue collar job, and quickly got myself into a position where I was, I guess, kind of the unofficial trainer of any of the new guys that would come on. And so my boss would have them in the shop for a minute, teach them some of the basics, and then he would just stick them with me, and I'd take them on service calls, and they'd ride with me every single day forever. And what initially starts out as simple technical conversations, like trying to teach them the basics of electrical controls, these kinds of things, would eventually, as I get to know them better, start turning into, not on purpose, but kind of unofficial life coaching almost, because I recognized in some of these guys that they were getting hung up and unable to absorb some of the technical information that they needed to understand, and the theory and the way to think through these problems, because they were wearing a mask. And what I mean by that is they weren't being their authentic selves because of some things that maybe happened previously in life. They're kind of putting on a facade, you know. They've hired an actor from within themselves to play them while they hide behind it. So, and I can see some of these things because I've experienced the same thing in life and had to work through that and figure things out, especially after I lost my wife. I had to, some traumas from childhood that had nothing to do with my losing wife all of a sudden, surface, and I have to work through those things. So, having worked through a lot of those things myself, I can now sense in some of these guys that I'm riding with, after spending enough time with them, that they're dealing with some of the same things. And so I'd start talking to them like, "Hey, I'm going to make some assumptions about your life, your upbringing, or whatever, and don't get offended, but just tell me if I'm right or wrong. I just want to make some guesses." I would make some guesses about how their childhood was or what their experiences in school were, this, that, and the other. And 9 times out of 10, I'd hit the nail on the head. Not every time, but most of them. And it was because I'd been there and I'd seen it. And so having had multiple experiences like that, and them asking me more of those like life questions, like, how do I deal with that? How did you deal with that? All the information and experience in my head is now starting to get a little bit more organized. And I, say something, they're like, dude, I need to write that down. And this sounds kind of arrogant, assholey, but I'd be like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. Maybe I should write that down too. But it wasn't all organized in my head. It was just like the experience that's up there. Like if you have a kid, or do you have kids yourself, Ryan?
No.
Okay. Do you have like younger family members, extended family, or
Yeah.
anything that
So
ever
I
asked
work with a lot
advice?
of kids though too. So I coach a
Okay,
lot of
so
kids. So I'm around kids quite a bit.
so you get it. Like every once in a while, you'll have to have like a, not just a sports conversation or not just a whatever conversation. You're gonna have like,
Yeah, a
this
lot
is
of
a
life.
life teaching moment, and
A lot of
what comes
coaching
out of your
for
mouth.
life.
Yeah. And so you're having these conversations with these kids and trying to help them understand how to be better people and push through adversity and all these things, and you start saying things that just come from your experience that you've never said before. You're like, why do I know that? And that just resonated really, really well with these people. And I think we all have experiences like that. So that was the background of where I got told multiple times, like, you need to write a book, you need to put this in a book. I'm like, all right, I guess maybe I should do it. And kind of at the same time, I had another pretty powerful experience, I was feeling a lot of pressure to do something, to do more. Like I felt like there was something pulling on me really hard, and I couldn't figure out what the hell it was. But I knew it was down teaching of some sort. So I actually took a adjunct job teaching at the trade school that I went to for a minute to try to satiate that feeling. And it was better, but it wasn't quite it for some reason. And finally I had this experience where, in a conversation with my mom, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I needed to write a book. I needed to get out there and share the story. I needed to speak, or whatever that looks like. And so I was like, well, shit, all right, I guess I guess I gotta write a book. So there was only one person that I knew from previously in life. I grew up in that little farming town I grew up with. There's a guy that lives there named Chad Hymas, and if you look him up, you'll see he's a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, but he's a National Speakers Association Hall of Fame motivational speaker guy. Travels all over the world speaking. And I grew up right with his family, went to the same church, So he's the only guy that I know that would have any idea what to do with this. And so I texted him one day and I says, hey, I have this crazy feeling that I needed to do this or whatever. And so he's like, all right, I'm out of town speaking for a little while, but when I get back, come over and we'll chat. So I go over to his house and kind of tell him the whole, like, this is what I'm feeling. I have no idea what to do with it. Like, what do I do? And he told me, he says, you should go do this, meet this person. And then, just run, just sprint that way, just go. And then, let me know how it's going and I'll kind of maybe, course correct or something like that and just see what happens. And so I got connected with the lady that helped him get his first couple of books out like 15, 20 years ago. And so I just hired her to kind of coach me through how do you even write a book and put that all together in a way that you can, turn into something usable for either speaking or creating coaching or, whatever. You can kind of scale it and do other stuff with it because that was a goal. So I guess, that's how I got into it. And I basically paid somebody to teach me how to do it.
Yeah, I've been there. So when you got that call and you knew you had to go start running that way, how many people thought you were crazy when you told them that?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, I've been there,
Well,
so I
I'm
know
just like,
exactly
dude,
what you're going through.
I have some stories, but I'm like, I also don't want to throw any particular people under the bus that I still have good relationships with.
Yeah.
But there were some people that I made some mistakes on, like the way that I was saying some things in some conversations, and initially just trying to figure it out. A couple of the people that I started not hanging around with, but like talking to about some things ended up being a little kind of off of what I ended up actually needing. So there were some family members or friends that are like, "What are you doing? Are you joining a cult? Like, what is this crap? Who are you?" Because it just came out of nowhere, and it is really, I had reached a point in my new career where my whole goal was to get back to where I was money, like income wise, at least almost to the point that my wife would no longer have to work to make our bills get paid. Like I wouldn't mind if she didn't work and things were still really tight, but I wanted to be able to cover all of the needs. And I'd finally made it to a place in this new job where I was being paid enough to cover everything, and it allowed her to quit her job and instead pursue photography and some other more fun ways to make money that she likes to do. So I just reached that, and a lot of people knew that I just finally made it here, because I even shared about it. I'm like, a big life lesson milestone. I tell you guys you can do anything. And I finally hit this one and on to the next one. And then all of a sudden I'm like, yoop, going this way.
Yeah.
They're like, you idiot. What are you doing? Because I still have that job, but they're like, are you quitting your job? Are you nuts? And I probably am nuts in some people's minds, but I couldn't, when God's pulling on me that hard, like I cannot say no without feeling like the biggest piece of crap, So I have to, I do not feel okay with myself unless I'm sprinting as fast as I can in the direction that I feel like I'm supposed to be going.
Yeah, I
So
love
that's
it
what I do.
because if you don't answer it, he's just going to keep coming back to you with the same
That's what
thing.
it was like for like 10 months. It got worse
Yeah.
and worse and worse until what I did was I finally kneeled down and prayed. And I thought about this prayer for like a week before I said it because I knew I was going to freaking get it. It's kind of like praying for patience. You don't ever do that because
Yeah.
you'll just get opportunities to be patient, but what it was, what did I say? It was because I felt like I had an experience where I felt like he had told me like, I'm going to ask you to do something or call you to do or something like that, and you're not spiritually ready to handle it, and you need to get it together. You need to get better on that end of things. And I was like, okay, yeah, I will. And then never really did. I made these goals. I'm like, all right, I need to break open my scriptures more often. I need to do this more often, and just kind of stay stuck in the same rut and never really change it. And after 10 months of trying to break myself out of my normal routine and do more spiritual things more often, I finally got so sick and tired of myself not being able to motivate myself that I finally sat down and kneeled down and prayed. I says, hey, obviously I suck. So whatever it is, just bring it on and make it happen now. And I guess I'll just have to figure it out. And then it was only a couple of days after that that I had that experience with my mom. I'm like, oh shit. Oh no. Not what I was thinking. I was thinking like, I don't know, be a youth minister at church or something. Like, no. Yeah, I didn't know what you were talking about.
Awesome. What are some tips for our listeners to find their purpose and gain clarity?
Oh boy. So I use this analogy of, well, let me start with this. Simon Sinek is a very famous motivational speaker. He got famous 10 or 15 years ago by doing a TED talk on start with your why. And just a motivational thing about how to anchor everything you do to like your sole purpose kind of a thing. And when I was going through having to figure out what the heck to do with my life after I lost my wife and am now a single widowed father, I remember thinking about that. I'm like, well, my why is my son. My why, his name's Vance. My why is Vance, but I can hold him in my hands, but that doesn't help me figure out what to do or where to go. It just gives me a lot of pressure that I better figure it out right now. You know, so casting my mind back on, well, how did I figure that out? I realized that, I teach it as why. WHY is an acronym of what hails you. I think that if you do enough self discovery and you do enough resolving those things that you discover about yourself that need resolved, if you do enough work inside your own mind and your own heart, then you can start to feel something pulling at you a little bit. You know, God puts something there, or there's just something you've always wanted to do and just had been buried under everything else in your head for so long. You start to sort some of that static out in your mind, and you can start to feel something pulling at you. And I call it what hails you, and that's what why stands for in my book. And I teach it as an acronym of there's a trumpet calling to each one of us way off in the distance somewhere that's like to where our heart wants to go, where we would feel the most fulfilled, right, with what we want to do. And maybe that's God calling to you. If you don't believe in God, maybe that's just the universe and where it wants to put you, however you want to think about it. But there's something that we're meant to do, that we're more natural at doing, that we're better, whatever. And if you think of that as an analogy, if you can hear that it's coming from way out there, at that moment, even though you can hear it out there, you don't know exactly what it is. You don't even know exactly where it is, but you know it's at least in this general direction, right? So, for example, if you're talking to a high school kid graduating high school and he's confused, you're like, I don't even know what to do for a career. I don't know what major to go, so I'm just doing generals, you know. You're like, well, if you do enough, you dig into yourself a little bit and you start to discover and resolve some of the things that you need to and grow up a little bit, then you can start to feel something pulling at you. And maybe that general pull, the only thing you can tell right now is that it's just in the business field, or it's just in the medical field, or it's just, whatever. But in order to figure out exactly where that is, you actually have to start moving toward it. Right? You're never going to know where it is until you get closer. And the closer you get, the better you can kind of see where it's at. An analogy that I use from my blue collar trades background is becoming magnetic to your purpose. And if you remember from maybe like high school physics or something, like the basics of how a magnet works, you got a north and a south pole, right? A push and a pull. But if you look into a little deeper, if you remember, a magnetic field is only generated when a charged particle is in motion. So an electron or an atom with a particular charge, if it moves, then it generates a magnetic field. So if you want to become magnetic to success, you want to become magnetic to your goals, whatever, and actually attract to you the things that you want to build those, not only do you have to be moving towards it, but the most effective way is to be charged moving towards it. And then in the book, I dive into like, well, what does it mean to be charged? Like, how do you charge yourself metaphorically? I talk about that's just your sole purpose. Like, why are you doing that? You really tie it back into a purpose bigger than yourself. You know, like I was doing it for my family, to take care of my family, and that gave me way more motivation. It made me way more effective at my schooling and more effective at my job. Because if I was only doing it for myself, well, I wouldn't have worked nearly as hard. You know, and I wouldn't have been nearly as attractive to employers. I wouldn't have been nearly as attractive to mentors, things like that. So I attracted people to me to help me, and I attracted things to me to help me because I was so driven, charged, I guess you could say, in pursuit of a goal. I mean, it sounds stupid simple because it is stupid simple. You have to know where you're going and go there really fast, and then things work out.
That's great advice because a lot of people want to have it all figured out before they even take that first step.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
In
you're
fact,
not going to get to where you want to go until you take that leap.
yeah, if I had to break, because this is the book, the Overhaul. It's called The Overhaul: Fixing Your Mindset and Driving Success. If I had to take this whole book and dumb it all down into one sentence, that sentence would be that clarity comes through committed movement, not before. Only through committed movement. You got to get moving before you'll have clarity on what it is out there or how to make it happen. And you look at the most successful businessmen, the richest people in this world, by and large, those guys shoot and then aim. They never aim before they shoot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, they go from idea to action faster than most people wake up in the morning. And stuff just works out, along with a lot of failures, but they go through the failures to make things work out a hell of a lot faster than most of the rest of us do.
Yeah. You touching on that. Failure is a part of life. How do you help with overcoming it and building resilience?
Well, you have to stop looking at failure as being opposite of success, because failure and success are the same direction. Just success is a little bit past failure. So if you go into, I don't know, you're wearing an OSU hat. So you coach football, basketball. What do you coach?
Wrestling.
Wrestling. Okay, I know nothing about wrestling. You could probably kick my ass, but I have to assume I played baseball my whole life, so that's my world, and I assume that there's techniques with wrestling that take a lot of repetition to get down right,
Yep.
as with most things. Is that safe to assume?
Yeah.
Okay, and so it's probably safe to assume that you're not going to get it right the first time.
No.
You're going to get flipped on your ass, right?
Yep.
But if somebody goes onto the mat just thinking like, well, I read this in a book and I'm going to try and expect it to work, how's that going to go?
Not very good.
Not very good. But the guy that gets out there, then he does more repetition, he works harder than anybody else, he does it over and over and over and over, then all of a sudden it starts to click and things start to work. So his success on the mat is through the failures on the mat, right? They're not
Yep.
in opposite directions. Without the failure, you could never have the success. And that applies to everything, you know? So that's the biggest perspective shift that I had in life, that I think everybody has to have, is understanding that when you have a failure, it's not a, oh crap, this sucks. It's a, oh heck yeah, I just learned something else to increase my chances of succeeding the next time. Like, my odds are getting better and better and better. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like everything you're saying is so simple yet so hard.
I know. Ugh.
That's the funny thing about it. That's why I've always told people, like anything to do with your mindset and upgrading it is so simple, yet it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do.
The hardest part is we tell ourselves the wrong story. We can talk about, you have to go through failure, you have to go through failure. And someone could look at that and be like, yeah, well, I failed a lot, but I still suck. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well, yeah, you're right. If you say that, you're right. If that's the story that you're telling yourself, you will act out the story that you play in your head. And I was another one of the little side things that I do is I assist with teaching some defensive handgun courses. And we just had a course this past weekend. We were out at a big gravel pit, and there's some people learning the basics of shooting a handgun, right? And some of these people can't hit the target worth a crap. And the ones that were getting frustrated with themselves and like, this just isn't for me. Well, guess what? They didn't make a whole lot of improvement. They left that class feeling like they wasted money. Usually luckily that's not very many people. Most of them end up flipping it around, but the people that are like, oh, I made some minor improvement here, I did a little bit better, and they stack on the wins, and they tell themselves the right story. All of a sudden, they're on cloud nine at the end. We even had a couple students. There's a skills test at the end. We haven't had a couple students that technically failed the skills test at the end, but they were on cloud nine because they were so much better than when they showed up, because they were telling themselves the right story, right? So those people went through the failure with the right attitude and were winning. The other people went through the failure with the wrong attitude and just saw nothing but failure, because that's what they were looking at, and their progress showed it.
Yeah. You do keynote concerts. Can you tell us what that is?
Oh, keynote concert. I mean, it's kind of what you think. A keynote is a speech and a concert is singing. So you blend those two together, you know?
So I've never seen one of them. I've heard about them, but I've never seen one.
Yeah, so you can't think of it as like a traditional concert where you just have a whole bunch of music and sometimes, the artist will say a couple of things in between the song, like, share a quick little message about the song and then sing the song. Well, it's kind of more opposite. It's mostly speaking, but with a couple of songs to emphasize the points, right? To drive home the emotional weight of what we're trying to teach. So, for example, I just went a month or so ago to Lincoln Memorial University in Tennessee, right? I think I mentioned that.
Is that in
And it's the
Nashville?
most it's right at the Cumberland Gap
Okay.
and like right there on the border of Tennessee and Kentucky. I actually stayed in Middlesboro, Kentucky, and then you go right across the border through the gap into Tennessee, and that's where Lincoln Memorial is. So, this guy he hired me to come out and speak to this group of about probably 60 or 70 veterinary science students. And he was like, "We want your full keynote concert thing. It's just going to be the lecture hall. So it's not in a concert hall. It's not an auditorium. It's a lecture hall, so there's not any fancy lighting. There's not really a whole lot of fancy speakers other than their general PA system for the classroom. So you got to get real creative with it. But for that message, what I was giving them was, he said one of their biggest problems with these students was that while they're very high performing and high achieving students going into essentially a medical field, in veterinary, they have a very high stress course load, a very labor intensive field they're going to get into. And so the anxiety was really, really high and the fear was really, really high that it wouldn't pan out for them. As they're going through their studies, like a lot of these kids, I just call them kids, are like the same age as I am, going through this program, knowing that they're going to have to get into business as well, like opening their own practice or running a practice that they take over or something like that. So a lot of them are dealing with this uncertainty of like, what if it doesn't work? What if? He's like, we got to flip that narrative because it's just making this whole program just be kind of this like kind of downer, like, oh my gosh. He's like, we got to flip that. So I go in there and I start off by sharing a story about cliff jumping that I went on, and I broke my kneecap cliff jumping. It was when I was probably 14, I think, in between 8th and ninth grade. And the reason I broke my kneecap was because right before and I call it cliff jumping. It wasn't crazy high. It was a giant rock at a lake, probably 20, 30 feet high at the most. Still super high for 14-year-old me. I was scared of heights. But the reason I broke my kneecap was because right before I jumped off this rock, I had the thought like, oh, what if I hit the rocks that are like close? They tell me to jump far, right? The jump as far out as you can. But what if I don't? What if I hit the rocks? So then I'm thinking about the rocks. So then guess where I look right as I go off the edge of it? Right at the freaking rocks. So then where do I go? Right at the freaking rocks. And I hit the rock and I break my kneecap, which no duh, right? But you put that into life, like you're in high school, you're in college or something, you're basically riding this conveyor belt up to the edge of this cliff and you're gonna get launched off the end of it, whether you like it or not. But it's not going that fast. You can fall off. And if you look at the rocks, that's where you're gonna hit. Or you can jump far and actually have a good time. And so I start with that story and then I throw in a song called Commit to Move. And I share some of those magnetic analogies about how to attract things to yourself and repel the right things and how do you create the reality that you want to live in. And I wrote a song around it called Commit to Move. And so I sing that song to drive the point home. And then after that, I get into the signature story of that's where I was at. And I did jump far and I did good. I made a lot of money. I got married. I had all the things going for me. But then you also have to understand that sometimes shit happens and stuff's going to get ripped out from under you, but that doesn't mean that your life's over. So whether you're just starting and you're worried that your life is almost over, or you've had everything fall apart and you worry your life's over, it doesn't matter. The climbing out of that is the same process. So I teach them that principle of your foundational why, the what hails you. And I start, giving some stories about that. And then I wrote a song called What Hails You that drives that point home. And then after I come out of that, I finish the story and I go into a little bit more faith-based stuff. If I can, I have to be tactful about it sometimes, depending on, the secular world that I'm speaking to. But usually I just get up. I'm like, according to my neck of the woods, this is, the way that I think. And they usually kind of let it slide. especially if I'm teaching in Tennessee. Like most
Yeah.
people don't care. It's great. And eventually I just have to drive home, like wherever you at, whether you're just starting or you're just starting over, you cannot stay where you are. You have to get going, whatever that looks like. So I wrote a song that was essentially my story of being stuck in that grief pit, realizing I need to get moving. I need to do whatever work I need to open myself up to another relationship. I need to open myself up to another career. I need to change a lot of things. And so I wrote the song called I Won't Stay Here. And that's a little bit more from my perspective of me kind of taking a big leap in a couple of different ways. And I end with that song, and that's kind of the power ballad to really drive home the message. And then I do a survey after the end, and I ask them, like, how are you feeling before this versus after? And I track the mindset shifts in the room, and I deliver a report to whoever hired me to show them, like, hey, here's how effective it was at whatever metrics you wanted to change, and we build a survey around that, and it works pretty well. So far, it's been a home run every time we've done it.
Awesome. What got you into motivational speaking?
I guess that it kind of goes back to that story that I talked when I had an experience with my mother, talking about some of these things that we wanted to do, and that just that pull. I was getting pulled so hard, and I didn't know what it was until I talked to my mother about it, and it hit me like a ton of bricks that I needed to do that. So I didn't know what that looked like. I had no idea how to get started, but I got a hold of Chad Hymas, my buddy, and I've actually hired him now as my speaker coach. Paid him a good chunk of change to help me build some things, and I just started sprinting. And that was I finally felt like I was satiating that pull, like I was going in the right direction. And I knew I was like, okay, whatever this turns into, I'm going in the right direction now. I don't feel such disharmony with myself and discontent with myself anymore. I feel discontent that I'm not to the level that I want to be at, but that's a way better sense of discontent of I'm not even doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, you don't have
I
that
guess that's
stuck,
where
I'm
I
stuck
started.
feeling.
Yeah. I don't feel like I'm stuck. I feel like I'm behind of where I want to be. I don't feel like I'm
Yeah.
stuck.
Yeah. What are your long term and short term goals?
So short term, I'm trying to get into a lot more schools. I've got some good deals worked out already. Like I said, I just did Lincoln Memorial University. I've spoken to a couple of local high schools, and I'm in Utah. And I'm traveling up to Idaho next month to do speaking at a school district, and they actually wanted to license the framework that I teach in my book, and that framework is DRIVE: Discover, Resolve, Invest, Visualize, and Elevate. And that's essentially the system that I teach of how to force success into life the way that you want it to look. How do you climb out of wherever you're at and make happen what you want to happen, what you want to have happen. And I got referred, and I can't remember exactly how it happened, but I got referred over there and started talking to this lady about some struggles that they were having with their school district, and told her what I talk about, and she loved it. And they want to create journals around it for their students. So as soon as I hop off this call, I'm going to be on, working on these journals for this school district. So short term, I just want to do more of that. And I've also started getting involved since the whole assassination of Charlie Kirk thing and that whole Turning Point USA thing that's kind of blown up. Um, there's been some high schools that started local chapters of that want to have a more faith-based message. And while I've never been involved with that organization at all, those kids have seen me speak somewhere, or they've seen videos that I post, and they know that I can do a very faith-forward message and tie it into school and can tie it into career or whatever. And so they've had me start going around to these kind of infant turning point chapters, telling them how do you embody the faith portion of what you want to do with school, and how do you embody the faith portion of this. So that's been really cool. I didn't expect that to happen, and that's all because of just recent world events that happened that blew everything up. And now all of a sudden there's an opportunity, there's a desire with a lot of youth to have a more faith-centered life, which I think is amazing, because that
Yeah.
certainly wasn't when I was in school. Obviously it's not everybody, but it's a bigger piece of the pie in school than before. So that's the short term. The long term, well, I have this part of my framework is visualize, right? So I do it myself, and I have this whole big visualization of me speaking on a stage, doing a keynote concert, but partnering with two or three of the guys that have been mentoring me, and us all doing an event together. Um, More of a faith centered one where, performing lyrics. One of them plays drums professionally, another one of them sings, and so I was like, doing something like that with those guys would be awesome, but doing it full time, doing some, more corporate stuff and being able to travel around and not have to fix stuff anymore and being able to do this as my full-time gig. That's the long-term goal. So hopefully my goal is within 5 years to make that happen. And so far we're on our way. We'll see how it pans out.
Awesome. How can people get a hold of you?
So social media is the easiest way. Facebook is where Facebook is where I'm most active. I used to post long form posts of my opinions on there. So they can find me there and message me on Facebook. It's just facebook.com/Weston Brandon. I try to post some stuff on YouTube, but Instagram and TikTok, I post shorts on there all the time of my speeches and stuff. So you can reach me there too. TikTok and Instagram is Weston G. Brandon. And then, of course, on my website, I got a contact form on the website. So you just go to westonbrandon.com and it's right there. And in fact, a little free gimme for people that listen to your episode. If they do go to my website, then they should get a pop-up message that offers them a free ebook that I wrote called God's Laws of Success. And it's where I teach that framework that I told you about, but with a very faith-centered point of view, using some stories from the Bible. And the main message of that is that we can co-create the miracles in our life with God. Sometimes it's up to us on how the miracles happen. He just waits for us to tell him or to make it happen. And like I use the story of Peter walking on water. I'm like, it wasn't Christ's idea for Peter to walk on water. It was Peter's idea. He asked if he could do it. And he's like, yeah, go ahead. And he did it. And the way that Moses split the Red Sea, like how it happened was Moses' idea. God just told him, with this staff, you'll do my wonders. And Moses was like, sweet. All right, I'm going to split this. And, that's super dumbing it down. But I use some stories like that to sometimes God just tells you can do it. It's just up to you to decide how.
Yeah.
And just go for it.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll put all that in the show notes too for everybody. Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
Oh boy. No, I think you pretty well did it. Yeah, the book is on Amazon. I guess if people want to find that, you just search the Overhaul, Weston Brandon, and it'll pull it right up. Or might even be easier, just go on my website. You'll have a little tab says the book, and it just takes you to the Amazon link, So if you want to copy that, that's fine. And I would encourage everybody to read it. I love it. And I guess the only other invitation I would make is if anybody's listening to this and wants a pep talk for some young adults, that is my wheelhouse. That's what I love doing. So reach out.
Awesome. All right. Final question. What is one piece of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with about overcoming adversity?
We already talked about failure and success from the same direction, right?
Yeah.
And I'll leave you with this analogy. Because growing up in rural Utah with cattle, I have experiences with a lot of cattle. So there's going to be a cattle ranch analogy here. But comparing cattle and bison, when you have a blizzard coming up, one of the biggest worries with cattle is a stampede, them just taking off running because they're scared and they tear through people's fields. I mean, they'll tear through people's houses and property. It's just a bunch of destruction because the cattle are scared of the storm, right? And they run away from it. Bison, on the other hand, or buffalo, whatever you want to call them, they do completely the opposite. When the storm comes, they turn and they face it head on and they run through the storm. And they get out of the storm onto the other side way faster. And it's very, very, very rare to see a bison die from a storm. But it's not rare to see cattle die from storms. And I think that's the key difference, is that cattle run away from it because they're scared of it. Bison face it head on and they run through it. Doesn't mean that it's any easier to be in the storm when you're in it, but they get out of it a lot faster because they know where they're going. If you don't know where you're going, then you just get tossed with the waves of the sea, man. You got to have a vision. It's not going to change what you're going through, but it changes how fast you get through it and what you are on the other side of it.
Great analogy right there. Weston, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your story.
Yeah, man. I enjoyed this one. Thanks for having me, dude. It was awesome.
Hey, not a problem, man. Well, guys, that's going to be all the time we have here today. Remember, the only way to get what you want is go through the fire.